and welcome into another edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Here we go now on this Friday, February the 28th. The year is 2020 as we come to you from chilly Middletown, New Jersey, where the temperature is about 40 degrees. Warmer, though, in Florida and Arizona, where spring training is now well underway. The Mets in action as we speak, with Marcus Stroman on the mound making his spring debut. We'll have more on the Mets coming up in a little bit. Also ahead, this day in baseball history, plus continuing on with our division-by-division preview, where today we will focus on the National League West. Plus, we'll have some of the latest news and signings and more. But we have to lead off today with the Yankees, and that's because there are now major injury concerns on that front. And we talked last week about Luis Severino, who recently was feeling some soreness in his forearm. Well, about a week passes, and we learn that the Yankee right-hander, who they had very high hopes for coming into this season, hoping that he would be fully healthy, they obviously found out that wasn't the case, and worse yet, he now needs Tommy John surgery, and I should say has already had the surgery as soon as yesterday, and that will cost him the entire 2020 season. A big blow to the Yankee rotation, mainly because it's not whole right now. And we've already talked about the absence of James Paxton for the first at least month, possibly more, after undergoing back surgery last month. They're down Domingo Germán with the domestic violence suspension, so this rotation is a little bit thin right now, and Severino, you hoped as a Yankee fan that he would tandem with Cole to form a dominant 1-2 punch in that rotation, and that's now not going to be in the cards for this year, so the rotation is more of a question mark. And we talked last week about the possibility of some less established guys being forced to step in, like Jonathan Loáisiga. Maybe one of their bigger pitching prospects comes a part of the mix. Maybe it's Chad Bettis, who was recently signed, the former Colorado Rocky. Either way, the Yankees are going to have to mix and match behind Cole and Tanaka in that rotation and hope that they get something of a bounce back out of Jay Happ, who knows his way around the game. He's a veteran. He's been around a lot of different teams, and last year I think more than anything was a victim of the juice baseball and the amount of home runs that he gave up. So you still expect him to be serviceable, and it's not a devastating blow to lose Severino as long as Paxton does eventually come back, and he has had his durability concerns in the past and has struggled to stay healthy for a whole season and give you a full workload. But it's an injury, nonetheless, that the Yankees will be able to overcome. There's just too much talent. You know about the lineup. They're going to score plenty of runs, and they'll find a way to piece together the rotation. If there's one thing that Aaron Boone has proven now as Yankee manager, it's that he knows how to handle injuries, and he's been able to insert a lot of backup kind of players into more prominent roles, probably more prominent than they would have expected at the time, and guys have been able to produce. So this year looks like it's not going to be any different after last year having a record, whatever it was, 30 players at one point hit the injured list. It was almost hard to fathom the amount of success this team had with that many injuries and still found a way to win 103 games. So it's a blow to lose Severino, but not devastating. The Yankees will be able to make up for that loss. That's the headliner. The other piece of news on the injury front with this team coming down this week involves Giancarlo Stanton, and he now has a strained calf. Opening day seems to be in question. Boone says he's going to be, quote-unquote, down for quite a bit, and right now I would be very frustrated with this guy because after only playing 18 games a season ago, you thought this would be a year where he'd be healthy to start the year and put up big numbers, the numbers you've grown accustomed to seeing from Stanton when he has done it with the Marlins, winning an MVP in the past, and this is not the way to get on the right foot. Now, maybe this is just a blip for this season. It'll cost him the first, say, 2 or 3 weeks, and he'll be healthy and have a monster year. Who knows? But right now, you'd have to bet against that because of the history this guy's had with his physical issues, and I would just be growing increasingly frustrated with him because, as we know, he's making a pretty penny. I mean, that contract is exorbitant that they inherited from the Marlins. Now, I get it. The Yankees didn't give up premium prospects to get him, and it was seen as a move that was too good to pass up. At the time, everyone was doing cartwheels when they made that move to get Stanton, and fans envisioned Judge and Stanton in the same lineup and the power potential that they had together as a tandem. But I looked at it and I said, it's just too much of a good thing. I think it made them unbalanced, that you don't need power hitter after power hitter after power hitter. You need some table setters. You need to have guys who can do different things throughout the lineup. And I just felt at the time it made them too one-dimensional. And I don't want to say that I've been proven right yet, because there is still plenty of time for him to establish himself in the pinstripes. But thus far, it has been a bitter disappointment. He had a decent year, but substandard compared to the year before in 2018. And then last year, we know, was limited to only 18 games, was basically a lost season, a non-factor throughout. But you were hoping that this was going to be a big bounce-back year, that it was a year where he was healthy and had the chance to show what he can do on the New York stage. This is not the news you wanted to hear. The fact that he's going to be out opening day, who knows how much longer after that. And with this guy's history, you just don't know. Is he going to be healthy? Can he stay healthy for a long period of time? It's just a big unknown right now, and an issue that the Yankees have to deal with on top of all their other injury issues. We're only a few days into spring training, and it's already shaping up a lot like it did last year. With the pitchers I mentioned, they're already down Aaron Hicks for at least half the season. He had Tommy John surgery. You got this Stanton news, so they got a lot to deal with right now. And again, Aaron Boone tasked with shuffling the deck and see if he can make it work. But I would bet they are able to make it work, because their team is just so deep. And that's the saving grace with this organization. They've been able to withstand so many injuries. At some point, though, you have to wonder if it is going to catch up with them, and if the gap maybe isn't quite as wide as you once looked at in this division, with the Rays competing with the Yankees. And I just don't look at the American League and see too many challengers in the entire league. So even with the question marks that they have with the injuries, you still have to favor the Yankees to win the American League and get to the World Series and see if they can break their 10-plus year drought. And now over to the Mets, where there's a few notes to touch on. One is on the injury front. What else is new when it comes to the Mets? And again, if anything with spring training, what you want more than anything else is to just get out of it healthy, to take your best team north and start the season on opening day with your best now 26-man roster. And when you're already down guys this early on, it compromises that. And the Mets got some unfortunate news. Now, it doesn't seem to be overly serious regarding J.D. Davis, who's a guy who is going to be relied on heavily now in this lineup. At the time they made the trade for him last offseason, he was seen as a guy that maybe he could contribute at the major league level. Well, he did a lot better than that last year in his first season, getting any kind of significant playing time, and now he's a bat that they're going to rely on in the middle of that lineup. Well, he came up with a shoulder issue. Remains to be seen how long he is out for. There's better news regarding Yoenis Cespedes, who seems to be on track possibly, and I say this cautiously because, like Stanton, with Cespedes, we know the issues he has with injuries, but he seems to be reasonably optimistic he could be ready to go opening day, and boy, would that give this team a boost. And I thought about this, that if Cespedes is healthy, and right now it's a little bit different with J.D. down, but let's say all the parts were healthy, I actually think the best Met team would be Cespedes in left field, with J.D. Davis playing third, which is probably his more natural position, and Jeff McNeil at second, and you know who that leaves out of the equation, Robinson Cano, who the pressure's going to be on Cano to perform because he's getting older. He regressed in a big way offensively last year, doesn't have nearly the same range defensively at second base, and so suddenly if he doesn't improve, I think there's going to be a short leash on Cano because there's guys who can fill the role. McNeil, probably a more natural second baseman. Davis at third with Cespedes in left. Again, it's no guarantee that Cespedes is going to stay healthy for any length of time, but I think that is probably the way the Mets best line up, and so the pressure becomes on Cano to bounce back and put up good numbers offensively. Otherwise, he could lose his everyday spot and lose some playing time at least. And then you get into who is leading the team. And we talked in the past when they made the hire with Luis Rojas taking over as manager after what we know happened with Carlos Beltran losing the job, being involved in the sign-stealing scandal with Houston as a player. So Rojas becomes the manager. And, there's good qualities about him and there's questions about him, I think only naturally. And there was an article posted this morning by Ken Rosenthal in The Athletic, which broke down all the positives and question marks coupled together. And the positives are he has experience. Now, his experience doesn't come at the major league level. He managed in a couple of the minor league affiliates of the organization. He also managed in winter ball in the Dominican Republic, so he knows his way around managing a game. But doing it at the major league level is a whole different animal, and remains to be seen if he's up to the pressure that comes with managing in New York. And that's always a fair question to bring up. Until you do it at this level, you don't know what the guy is going to do. And so even though the good qualities are there and he seems to be very good with handling people and he has experience managing in the minor leagues, how is he going to handle a starting rotation and when to take a guy out and how to handle the lineup and the bullpen and make the in-game maneuvers and run the clubhouse and run all the things that you have to do as a major league manager? You don't know until he steps into that seat how he's going to fare. So the questions are there, but one thing is clear is that the organization is very high on him, and Brodie Van Wagenen, for one, is, even though he wasn't Van Wagenen's number one choice, we know that was Carlos Beltran, he was forced to pivot to a secondary choice, so to speak, and then it wound up being Rojas. But other coaches on the staff speak glowingly about him, as do the players on the roster. And remember, there's a lot of players who played under him in the minor leagues. Alonso, Conforto, Nimmo, McNeil, all these kind of guys rave about the potential Rojas has as a manager, so that's a big benefit when you go through your first go-round as a major league skipper. So again, the questions are there, but there are a lot of positives, and it's just a matter of let's see how it plays out. I didn't hate the hire at the time, but I did raise some questions about it that I think were fair at the time, and, we'll see. But one thing I hope, and Ken Rosenthal noted it in his article, is that you hope the organization gives him a chance, that it's not at the first sign of struggle, all of a sudden the hot seat rumors start and all this. No, you got to let the guy get a chance over a long period of time to see what he can do. He's raw, obviously, having never managed in the big leagues. So what you have to do is give him a chance and hope for the best and hope that he can lead this team to prominence. It's a tough division. It's going to be tough to make the playoffs, but they have talent on the roster, and we'll see if he can get the most out of it. And then one other thought about the Mets that I was thinking about in the last couple of days is who is the key player this season? And I narrowed it down, and I got down to my choice for that pick. And I think if this guy breaks out and takes the next step, I think it would go a long way in making the Mets a much better team. And I point to the shortstop, Ahmed Rosario. And if you remember years ago, before he made his major league debut and was going through his minor league career, he was ranked as one of the top prospects in the game by Baseball America, even close to number one in some circles. So that doesn't just happen by accident. There's a lot to like about Rosario. You see the tools are there. He can hit. He's got a little bit of power. I think that'll only increase as the years go on. He has speed. He can steal bases. He's a dynamic player when everything's going right. Defensively, he had his shortcomings in the first half of last year, but improved in a big way the second half of the year. So if he takes that next step, and I think there's some question just how good is he? Is he a 250 hitter? Is he a 280 hitter? That gap right there, I think, will go a long way in telling you how good the Mets are as a team, because I think you look at the other parts and you kind of know, all right, maybe Pete Alonso isn't going to hit 53 home runs, but he's going to hit on the down 35, on the up 45. You figure. Jeff McNeil has proven himself at the major league level to be a very good hitter, 300-plus hitter. You would expect that kind of production again. You kind of know what you're going to get from Michael Conforto. He's going to give you good numbers in the power department, the chance to get better, but you kind of know where he sits. Wilson Ramos, veteran behind the plate, you know what kind of production you're getting there. So you look around the diamond and you can kind of project what guys are going to do. Rosario is the one that I think has a wide gap as to what he's capable of, and the upside is really there that if he reaches that level, I think it takes the Mets to a new level, and I think he's the key player this season all the way around. If he reaches those heights that Baseball America once projected as one of the top prospects in the game and becomes, who knows, maybe even the team's leadoff hitter. Now, odds are against that because he's not a big on-base guy, but he is an electrifying player, a guy who can set the table, hit the ball in the gaps, run, steal bases. And if he does that at a high level, I think that's a big-time difference maker for this team. So Rosario, my key player for the Mets. And with that, let's move into the latest news and signings. And again, as I talked about last week, we're kind of light in that department at this point of the offseason with a few weeks to go until opening day. But there was one signing. It was a minor league deal that Brian Dozier, the second baseman, agreed to with the San Diego Padres. Dozier, who last year was in Washington, his best years, of course, were in Minnesota, where he was perennially a 30 home run guy there for a couple years. I think he even topped 40 one year. So he has power at the second base spot, which is a rather rare commodity. Now, he's fallen off in recent years, but he's still a capable player. We'll see if he makes the Padres after they sign him to a minor league deal. And then on the news front, not so good news on a couple of pitchers. The Red Sox announced that their ace, the left-hander Chris Sale, is going to start the season on the injured list, and that's just not good news at all. Last year, Sale did not have a great year. The velocity was down. He was still striking out the world, but the ERA was high, was not overall a very good year, and then wound up missing the latter part of it with injury. And so not at all a good sign that he starts this year on the shelf. And as we know, there's a lot of questions surrounding the Red Sox, just how good they're going to be. If they have any chance at contending or being better than people expect, Sale has to be himself, and not being there to start the year is tough for Boston. Also, regarding the Angels, one of their starting pitchers, a guy that they had pretty high hopes for, Griffin Canning, who's a young right-hander, and the Angels, we know, struggle in the pitching department. Well, Canning possibly will have to go Tommy John surgery. That is not official yet, but he's dealing with some elbow soreness, and there's questions about whether Tommy John is eventually going to be the ruling there. And the Angels need every available starting pitcher that they can come by, because it's a team that is anchored by their lineup, which is a very good and deep lineup, only enhanced this offseason by getting Anthony Rendon. But the pitching is where the questions are. And yes, Shohei Ohtani is coming back, and if he can be that ace, that'll be a big boost for that ball club. But they're relying on a lot of lesser guys, some that they imported in the offseason, Dylan Bundy, Julio Teheran. I think their rotation is a little better than it gets credit for, but it certainly has to be whole, and you can't have key contributors down for the entire season, as would be the case if Canning is forced to go Tommy John surgery. So that's something that bears watching there. And then one other piece of news, the Brewers announced a 5-year extension for right-hander Freddie Peralta. The same for the White Sox and relief pitcher Aaron Bummer, as these deals take these players through their pre-arbitration and arbitration years, buy those out, get them under team control for some extra time at a reasonable cost. They're guys that the respective teams are happy with their production with and want to make sure they're a part of the long-term plan. And so that's what we got on the signings and news front for today. And now we'll move into part 2 of our division-by-division preview. Last week we took a deep dive into the National League Central. Today we're going to move west and go to the National League West. And when you look at this division as a whole, it obviously is a one-horse race. There's no other way to say it. The Dodgers are projected to win over 100 games. They've done that a couple times recently and now added one of the best players in the game, so they're home free in that division. But nonetheless, we'll still go team by team and give a breakdown and give some thoughts as to where teams are going to finish, kind of like a power rankings in the division. And we'll start at the bottom with number 5, where I'm going to slot the San Francisco Giants. And we know this team had all kinds of success in the early part of the last decade. They won the World Series 3 times, but since then it's been kind of a steady decline for this team. And I think one problem that they've had is they've gotten tied up in a lot of contracts, sizable contracts with big dollar figures that just haven't given them very big rewards. And you think about Jeff Samardzija and Johnny Cueto are two of them that when they have been healthy, which hasn't been very often, they just haven't been that good. And Matt Cain is another one who comes to mind, who did his part for the Giants when they were winning World Series, but then they signed him to a big deal and never really got a good return on that investment. He retired a couple of years ago, but after that contract was not the same pitcher, was battling numerous injuries, arm trouble. So that's a big problem with the Giants. They weren't a team that was ever dominant. They were a wild card kind of team. They won in the upper 80s, and they found a way to get the job done in the postseason. It was a credit to Bruce Bochy working well to get this team to the top, but it wasn't a team that you ever looked at and feared a lot of the hitters in their lineup. They were built on their starting pitching, and Bruce Bochy basically pushing the right buttons, and that led to 3 championships, and since it just hasn't been the same. Now, as we know now, Bruce Bochy has retired. They have a new manager in Gabe Kapler, which was kind of a curious choice considering feeling was he didn't do all that good of a job in his 2 years in Philadelphia, but he immediately gets a second chance. We'll see what he's able to do. The team on paper, though, isn't very good. They don't have a very good lineup. It's a team that struggled to get production from their outfield now for it seems like a number of years, and it just doesn't project to be a team that's going to score a whole lot of runs. And then you look at the rotation, it's the guys that I mentioned, Cueto and Samardzija are at the top. They're never healthy, and they just haven't been the same when they have. So the Giants just are kind of in retool mode at this point. Madison Bumgarner no longer a part of things there. Buster Posey, it's been kind of a drop-off in production offensively, so they're trying to work their way up, build up this farm system. Farhan Zaidi has taken over as president of baseball operations, and he's trying to get this team turned around again. It's a franchise that is loved by that city, and when they were good, it was a real treat to watch games in that ballpark. The beautiful setting right on the bay. It's such a great ballpark, and when the team had success, it was just a sight to see, and it remains to be seen if they're going to get back to that point. It's going to take some time. They're going to have to rebuild this farm system, find a way to get younger because they've gotten tied up with a lot of veteran big contracts that just haven't worked out, and I think that's really been the reason more than anything else for the Giants' demise in recent years. As for the number 4 team, and some may be surprised that I have this team as low as I do because they're seen as a team that's on the rise, that with their big farm system and a lot of young talent that's either at the major league level or coming soon is going to make its move and work its way closer to being a playoff contender. But I'm not quite there yet on the San Diego Padres. And to me, I just need to see it to believe it. And they just haven't had a lot of success under this regime with A.J. Preller. When he first took over, he wanted to win right away. And remember, he made the trades and thought he constructed what was an all-star outfield when he got the likes of Matt Kemp and Justin Upton with the incumbent Will Myers, and it just did not work for San Diego. I didn't like it at the time. None of them was a pure center fielder, and this team never won anything of significance. In fact, they've been a losing team every year since 2010. And so I'm just not yet ready to say this team is right on the cusp of making the playoffs. I think they're moving in the right direction, and certainly they have some big guys on the way, whether it's Mackenzie Gore as a left-hand pitching prospect who the industry loves. Fernando Tatis, we know, is a star already at the major league level, and they got a lot of pitching coming, and they have this number 1 farm system and all that. But I'm just not sure I look at the team this year and say they're ready. I think they're still a little ways away. One thing we need to see is Manny Machado look like Manny Machado, because they invested $300 million into the third baseman, and year 1 was just not that good. It was underwhelming, to say the least. Now, it was perhaps a transition going from the American League to the National League, where he had previously spent his entire career, also going from very hitter-friendly Camden Yards to the spacious Petco Park. He just didn't produce at home last year. I think the batting average was under 220. For the season, his OPS was under 800. Now remember, this was a year where the ball was flying, where guys you never heard of had big power numbers and high OPSs and this and that, and Manny Machado did not live up to the standards. Now, I would expect something of a bounce-back year. I think he'll be better than he was in year 1, but the Padres better hope he is, because with that kind of investment, remember, the previous offseason, they signed Eric Hosmer to a big contract, so that's back-to-back offseasons that the Padres were pretty big spenders, and they're waiting for it all to click. Now, this offseason, they got Tommy Pham in a trade. I think that'll help the top of the lineup, a guy who gets on base at a high clip. Will Myers at one time was thought to be a franchise-level player, and it just hasn't worked out after they gave him a pretty big contract. And can he become that player? There's been a lot of talk about potentially moving him while he's still on the roster. Can he perform the way he's capable of? That would go a long way in making this team improve, but I'm just not seeing it overall. I think they're still a little ways away, and until they get more pitching up at the major league level, I just don't think the Padres yet are ready to take that next step. I think they'll be better than they were last year, but to me, they're right around the 80-win mark, and here's a fun exercise for baseball fans. Name the Padres manager, because I bet there's not a lot of people out there who can. It was a very unknown name at the time they made the hire with Jace Tingler, who had worked in the Texas organization, but who knows how he's going to handle his first go-round as a major league skipper. So I just have too many questions with this team. I'll peg him at 80 wins and 4th place in the division. And then to the number 3 spot, and I feel like I have a soft spot for the Colorado Rockies. I'm not quite sure exactly what it stems from. Maybe it's the fact that they get this bad rap for playing in Coors Field and that all their guys are overrated and the offensive numbers are inflated and this and that. But I think this team is better than most, and look, we know last year was not a good year. Their pitching was a disaster. It was basically dead last in all the major categories in the National League. But the 2 years prior, they were in the postseason both of those years. So there is potential with this starting pitching. It's basically the same group as those years. And I have to figure Kyle Freeland is not going to be the disaster he was last year when he was sent to the minor leagues and had an ERA in the 7s. I mean, it was just a total flop of a season, but the year prior, he was a Cy Young finalist. So you have to figure there's some middle ground for that left-hander, and that German Marquez, who has big-time stuff, can be a top-of-the-rotation arm. And you know that playing in Coors Field, they're going to score runs, and this lineup is still really talented. Now, we don't know what the future holds for Nolan Arenado. Are they going to hold on to him? I think they're better off holding on. We'll see. We know there's issues there relationship-wise with the front office, with GM Jeff Bridich. But it's not just Arenado. Like Trevor Story, they signed to an extension in arbitration for 2 years. We know he's now an upper echelon player at the shortstop position, and Charlie Blackmon. And I, for one, like David Dahl and don't think we've seen the best of him if he could ever stay healthy for a whole season. So there's a lot to me that I like about this team. Now, the bullpen is always a question. The pitching in and of itself is always a question just by playing in that ballpark. But I've seen them have success. I've seen them make the playoffs. And I think last year was more of the anomaly. I'm not saying they're going to be an elite team, but I think they're going to be better than people think. A winning record and good enough for 3rd place in this division. Give me Colorado at number 3. And I was even considering Colorado as high as number 2, but I'll give the slight edge to Arizona. They brought in Madison Bumgarner. This is a team that's in some ways the National League equivalent of the Tampa Bay Rays in that they get a lot out of their roster. Torey Lovello does a great job as the manager. I like some of the moves they made the offseason, namely Cole Calhoun, who's an Arizona native. I like that fit in their outfield. They traded for Starling Marte to man the center field spot. The other Marte had a tremendous season last year. He goes back to his natural position at second base. That would be Ketel Marte. They're a team that's very much focused on the defensive side, and I think that's a big plus. You know, they have Gold Glovers, Nick Ahmed, and they really focus on having good defense in all parts of their team, and I think they'll find a way to be competitive. This rotation is not bad. I think you'd have to favor it over Colorado. I think that probably gives them the advantage with Bumgarner now at the top and Robbie Ray, who at one time was being considered as a trade candidate, but he's still there. I like Zach Gallen a lot. They got in a trade with the Marlins. Mike Leake eats up innings in the middle of the rotation, so it's a pretty good-looking rotation, and because of the emphasis on defense and you know, they just kind of find a way. They piece it together. There's not really a whole lot that overly stands out, but I just think they'll find a way to be competitive, win in the low to mid 80s, and take their best shot, so I'll take Arizona at number 2, and I don't need to go on a big song and dance about number 1. I've talked a lot about them in shows past with the Dodgers. We know they're loaded, and there's just not a whole lot more to add than that. We know they're going to win this division. It's almost like you don't even have to play the games in the National League West. The Dodgers are just that good. They won over 100 last year, and now you add Mookie Betts. I mean, you have 2 MVPs in the outfield. Gavin Lux at second base is going to get a chance to show what he can do. Corey Seager, I think, if he's healthy, will have a big bounce-back year. Justin Turner's as steady as it gets at third base. The rotation, I like Walker Buehler as a possible Cy Young Award winner this year. Clayton Kershaw, oh yeah, that guy, still pretty good. Don't underestimate David Price, who they got in that trade. I think he'll find a home in the National League and do a nice job in the middle of that rotation. So there's just nothing that you can pinpoint and say that's a weakness. The one question I would have with the Dodgers would be in their bullpen, where Kenley Jansen has just not quite been the same guy the last couple of years. So that would be the one area, and the guys leading up to him, the Joe Kellys. They brought in Blake Trinan. So maybe if there's one area you could quibble, and it's hard with this Dodger team because they're loaded, but it would be the bullpen. Can they get big outs late in games and nail it down late? Other than that, though, there's just not many questions. They're going to cruise to another division title. They've done that 7 years in a row. And my gosh, I mean, are they going to be fun to watch with Betts at the top of the order and Bellinger? I mean, it's just going to be fun to watch. Almost not fair. I mean, when Pacoda projects them at over 100 wins, and the next highest total in the National League is actually the New York Mets, which are about 15 wins under that. Who can challenge them? I still think maybe the Braves, who, for whatever reason, the projections on them are very low. I don't really get it, but be that as it may, the focus is on the National League West, where the Dodgers reign supreme and are the best team on paper in quite some time, quite frankly. And with that, we'll move into this day in baseball history, and it was on this day, February the 28th, back in 1986, that Commissioner Peter Ueberroth handed 7 major leaguers 1-year drug-related suspensions without pay. Among the victims were the Mets' Keith Hernandez and the Yankees' Dale Berra. And speaking of the commissioner and handing out suspensions and that kind of thing, for the 9th inning, we'll tell you that the Red Sox investigation, we thought it might be completed by this point. There was some thought maybe even as soon as today, but it sounds now that we'll have to wait until next week before Rob Manfred has a ruling on what came out for Boston regarding their own sign-stealing situation during their World Series winning year in 2018. So it's an offseason that's been marred by sign-stealing, but a wild offseason, as we've talked about, with trades and free agent signings and a flurry of activity, and obviously the sign-stealing. A fun offseason to do a podcast. Pretty soon we'll have games on the field, and that is good news. Of course, spring training already underway, but March the 26th is opening day, so just under a month from that point, and we very much look forward to that, and we'll see if there's any ramifications regarding the Red Sox when we hear word from the commissioner, possibly next week. And with that, that'll close this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Thank you for checking it out today. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Brian Goudsward, and we'll see you again for another show next week where we'll break down the National League East. We delayed on that because we've spent a lot of time on them, but we'll take a deep dive on the Mets division next week, as well as whatever else may be happening, possibly a word on the Red Sox, and whatever else we can cook up for our show next week. So thanks again, and our thanks as always go to Dylan DePrado. I'm Brian Goudsward. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you again next week. So long.